to look at, now in this first instance, we're going to try and understand the project context. In any organization, when you do strategic planning, you need to understand the context within which the organization operates. And the same goes with when we execute projects. Right at the conceptual stage to the planning phase and going forward, it is important that you have a clear understanding of the context from a social perspective within which that project is going to be implemented, because it can sink or make your project to succeed. And the issues we're going to cover, we're going to look at generally what is called your pestles analysis, and it may not be new to many of you. And we're going to look at some of these factors that you need to understand. And as I said in the beginning, the very first and most important thing about community risk is appreciating the environment. When you do appreciate the environment, it puts you in a better position to be able to deal with the contradictions that you'll be confronted with. So we're going to look at some of your political issues, your economic issues, and then delve into your social issues, and some of your technological issues, some of your environmental factors, as well as legal issues. And we're going to spend a little bit more time on the structural factors that you need to be aware of. Now, when we look at the World Economic Forum in their Global Risk Report of 2018, one of the key things that they mention is that social instability, unemployment or underemployment are real risks to be watched. Now, this is very important. If at the level of the World Economic Forum, these particular issues are flagged as issues, as risks to be looked at, then we also need to pay attention. And even in the South African context, the Institute of Risk Management South Africa, in its National Risk Report for 2018, what it also does, it says structurally high unemployment or underemployment is the #1 risk out of the top 10 country risks for South Africa, even as we speak in 2018. And what is even scary, according to the report, is that as a country, we are least prepared to deal with this particular risk. And the reason why they point out structural unemployment is the fact that we have a challenge that there is a mismatch between positions that are available as well as the skills that are available within the market. So there's a mismatch, and it then contributes to structural unemployment. And what you also find is that because of changes in technology, the training institutions and learning institutions do not keep up with industry in order to make sure that graduates that come out of the educational system are better prepared to enter the world of employment. And so then it contributes to this particular challenge. Also, one of the reasons, or some of the reasons why as a country we are least prepared, it's because over time we have not focused robustly in terms of dealing with the social ills of our country. And what we find is we have, and as government, we have said that if we look at providing your social grants, to some extent it deals with the issues that we have. But if you look at some of the studies that have been done, they have said that, there's been an over-reliance on state support, and on its own it has caused certain dependencies. And also, what we find is that over time there's been almost a systematic erosion of governance. The issues around corruption have contributed to lack of trust in our governance system, and to a certain extent into the judicial system. So these things do contribute in us as a country becoming less focused or least prepared in dealing with these issues. Now, as we set the scene, a few years ago, around 2013, government adopted the National Development Plan. And it's a 30-year vision that is aimed at dealing with issues of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And the document commented that these challenges will be eliminated or reduced by 2030. A preliminary assessment that was done about 18 months ago indicates that government is unlikely to achieve these objectives by 2030. And the reason also that I'm putting up the slide is that I would like to leave you with this, or imprint this thought in your mind, that as long as our society, and you've seen some of the reports that says that our Gini coefficient is quite high. In other words, the levels of inequality in South Africa are very high compared to other countries. And as long as we have poverty, inequality, and unemployment, social risk will continue to be with us. And the point I'm also trying to impress on your minds is that no amount of planning is going to remove social risk. No amount of engagement is going to remove social risk, especially in the face of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Because by and large, these are the issues, these are the key factors that drive communities to engage with projects or to disrupt projects or to demand to derive certain benefits from the projects. So we need to be aware of these three elements. As long as they are there, we're going to have this particular challenge. And further, what complicates the picture is the fact that we've got dysfunctional local municipalities. In my observation, I haven't done really a study, but in my observation, the areas within which I operate around the country, in those municipalities where the municipality is fairly dysfunctional, what you do have, then the consequence is lack of service delivery. And that lack of service delivery is then projected onto any company that is executing any project in the area. So oftentimes, when your projects are being targeted by communities, it is not because of ill feelings towards the project itself, but it's simply a role substitution, where municipality had to step in, that role is being substituted for the particular company. And oftentimes, it may be necessary that as you engage with community risk, that building capacity, collaborating with other companies to build capacity at a municipal level may deliver the long-term solution that you may be looking for. But of course, it depends on the nature of your projects, whether your projects are permanent in a particular area. For example, in the mining industry, the mine will be there for 30 years or so. But if it's a road or whatever project, it may be for a few months or for a few years. Now, Charles Sykes says, we are in an era where we are moving from a revolution of rising expectations. Because of the issues of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, communities have expectations that when there's a project in their area, they are going to find employment. They are going to find opportunities for their small businesses. And expectations are increasing. And also what happens is, as companies, you almost become a victim of your success. As you deliver to a community, as you create employment, you're actually creating even more expectations. Now, Charles Sykes says we're actually now moving from there to a revolution of rising sensitivities, meaning that when companies fail to plan to deal with communities, that failure increases frustration, and that frustration becomes an issue on its own. So communities then blame you for not resolving issues. So when you fail as a company to resolve an issue or to address an issue, you are actually creating more problems for yourself. One of the things that we have to deal with is the factor of tripartite disequilibrium. Now, the key stakeholders in society as a whole, it's business, it's your community, and it's government. And I could have left out community because community elects government, and government becomes the agent of of the community. But the reality is that there are sometimes legitimacy issues that communities raise about government, especially at municipal level with respect to councillors. So when we have these three not working in partnership, it makes the environment within which we implement projects even more complex. When you come into an area and the community members do not have any confidence in their local councillors, it increases your risk. And if as a business you do not engage with the community, you also do not have confidence in government, it also makes your environment even more complex. It becomes more difficult. And the challenge oftentimes is that as a business, if you are able to bring these things together, it makes things simple for yourself. So sometimes as companies, it's important that we do not just deal with the risk at hand, but we may even have to go broader than the risk at hand in order to ensure that we create space for these social partners to engage.
And sometimes local businesses will say, we can do the job, but actually they may not have the capacity. But you need to go through a process for them to understand that indeed you would like to help, but you do not have the capacity. And sometimes you do not even have the time to build the capacity because of your client has given you tight deadlines. So you have to be very creative about some of these. You may even have to set up an enterprise and supply development program that is perhaps outside the construction area. Maybe it's in some other area that is closer to the community, just so that you are seen to be contributing to socio-economic development in one way or the other. Some of your social factors is, what are the issues in the community? Is the community united? Is the community divided? Are there factions in the community? Are there gangsters in the community? Are there groups that are fighting each other in the community? These are things that a social specialist on the project team should be able to inform the team about and advise the team. Issues around demographics. Is it largely an area with youth who are unemployed? Because it's almost certain, if you're sitting with youth who are unemployed, your engagement is going to be more robust. You can expect that. Education issues are important. Issues of health. If the local municipality that's running the local clinic and the clinic closes at 5, and a lady arrives there, she is in labor and arrives there at 5:55, and the security says, look, there's no time, you need to go to the hospital, and turns her away, and something unfortunate happens out of this situation, the community can go on a protest and it can impact your project. But you need to understand as a social specialist that you plot the risks for the team, so that upfront the team has got a view of potential risks, that this could go wrong. If this goes wrong, this can happen. You are already on the lookout for these things. These things are on your radar screen as a project team. Perhaps maybe the only issue I want to pick up from this one is that in the era of social media, there's easier information sharing when it comes to mobilizing communities. I'm dealing with a particular client, and one of the influential leaders is very active on Facebook. And he posted something on Facebook that this company is undermining us as a community. They are not implementing certain projects. Of course, it wasn't quite true. The very next day, that project was stopped. The communities were mobilized overnight. So sometimes it doesn't take facts for your project to be impacted. It just takes a rumor, or it takes a posting that is not factually accurate. Now, As I indicated earlier on, it's important that you understand the impacts that your project has on your community. There could be issues around pollution, how you manage waste, issues of dust and noise management, depending on the type of project that you have. It could be issues around when you are improving infrastructure. You may be, improving the road infrastructure, and something happens, and there's a safety incident. It could impact your project. The communities could protest and deal with the project. It could be that you are setting up, you are improving the road, and there are barriers on the road, but now people now have to take and there's no bridge across the road, and people now have to take, it takes them longer to go home. They no longer just walk across the road as they used to. There's now a detour for them to reach home, and that itself can lead into protest action. So part of your public participation process before you implement the project is to pick up these issues and engage the community on. Because sometimes communities may raise these issues, and then you may have to reconfigure some parts of your project. Otherwise, the risk is you may not even take off on your project. Certain times, because of communities trying to sustain themselves, your particular project may traverse a piece of municipal land where communities have decided to plant food gardens, or there's an informal playground, and if your social specialist does not pick up these things, you have taken out the livelihood of community members. You have also removed an informal playground. And after the project has been implemented, there is nowhere where the kids play. And this, if you look at some of the studies, it can add to drug abuse and all the other social ills. And these are issues that are not trivial. They have to be attended to. As part of understanding your environment, it's also important to know what is the attitude and the experience of the community with respect to the rule of law. If there is a total disregard in the area for the rule of law, you already know that you are going to have a hard time operating in that particular area. If there's a culture of non-payment of services, that culture is going to be projected onto your particular project, because it could be that people are used to getting things for free, and that mentality will also say we need jobs, such that when you sit in community meetings and you say for general labor there are going to be, for argument's sake, 22 work opportunities, and the community says no, we demand 400. I am busy with a client at this point in time where the contractor to the client got somebody, to a service provider, to implement a project, and the contractor has got X number of employment opportunities available. And as they were busy with the site establishment, it was disrupted. And I was called in, had a meeting with them, and the issue was that we are not interested to hear how many jobs your project is going to create. What we know is that the client of this contractor has over years not employed people from a certain area in the township. Which of course is not true, because the client had not been recruiting per ward, because they were saying our ward has not been taken care of. And as we speak, that project is on standstill, and this is maybe it's 4 or 5 weeks now, because that's the demand. When you go into an area, you survey the area as a social specialist with your team, and when you see self-made road humps all over the area, you already know that you have issues to deal with. I mean, it's as simple as that. The community has taken the law in its hand, and it could be because they have been failed by the authorities, and they are now trying to protect their children. But you already know that there's already an issue between the community and authorities. There's something for you to look out. Right. Perhaps just on the issue of, the responsiveness of law enforcement agencies. I indicated in the beginning that sometimes it becomes important when you deal with violent community protests that you need to call in law enforcement agencies. And that's just the reality of life. But the caution is, do not outsource your normal community engagement processes to the police. In other words, do what you need to do as a company. Sometimes companies take shortcuts with the view that when things go wrong, they will call in the police. The reality is, if you've studied the Farlam Commission Inquiry report, is that out of that report, one of the things that came out was that there were a number of human rights abuses by the police. And since the Marikana tragedy, the police are generally reluctant to take over what they would perceive as the work of the company, which is to engage with communities. I've been called to situations where protests were violent and the police said, we are here to maintain law and order, but we are not here to deal with your issues. The two of you need to sit around the table, the company and community leaders, and resolve your issues. And also, in some of the instances where police had to deal with community protests, for example, last week, the IPID arrested 2 police officers and they appeared in the Tshwane Magistrate Court because there was a community protest at the Tshwane University of Technology. The students were protesting and a student was shot dead. 2 police officers have been arrested. So police are not even sure when and what kind of violence to use, because reality is when you are in call it a battlefield if you like, sometimes police become trigger happy, sometimes it's a difficult choice for them to make. So we need to appreciate those challenges. When we look at some of the structural factors, as part of understanding your environment, these issues are important. Overall, understand the community, know who you're dealing with, know the demographics, and identify your community structures. And they could be varied. It could be church organizations, NGOs, disabled groups, youth groups, community-based organizations. It could be a whole range of them. But you need to have a clear grasp of why were they established, when were they established, because some groups, as soon as there is a project, as soon as they see, you come into the area, you have a public participation process, they start a group for your project. And they become an immediate stakeholder. So you need to understand that, because if they were established, the day before, you already know that, you need to put them on your radar screen. Understand who are the formal and informal leaders. Oftentimes you go into a community meeting and you think that you are dealing with community leaders, but the real leaders are not in the meeting. They've got the levers of power. They're pulling the strings outside the meeting. So you need to understand that. You need to understand what's their main agenda. You need to understand their loyalties. Do they have a constitution? Do they have a disciplinary code? And oftentimes they don't. But it's important to understand this information, because when you understand how they are structured, it also gives you a sense. The chances are, if an organization has got a constitution, a disciplinary code, they are fairly organized in terms of how they hold their own meetings, and therefore they will be able to engage with you in a decent manner in a meeting situation. You can have a meeting. Right. Let's look at this one. and then I'll open for discussion. As the project manager of ZK Construction, you have been meeting with Motsamai, who is a community leader, on a monthly basis for the last 3 months, in order to update him on the progress of the road maintenance project. On Monday morning, you receive a call from the foreman at the site office that a group, or even at the site of the project, that a group of community members have stopped the project. They want to know why the project manager has been meeting with Motsamai, who is not representing any organization. You know, you thought you had it all. You've been providing updates and your charts and all of those things, but here we are. Any thoughts on this and also on what we have been talking about? I'll open. Any takers? Yes, sir. If you could just kindly raise your voice. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
I think that before one engages with one or two persons, one's got to be careful. You'd rather just go to the chief, talk to the chief and say, you know what, we are going to be implementing certain project or projects in your area. We'd like to have participation from the community. We therefore are going to issue pamphlets, make sure pamphlets are delivered to every household, put up on the roads, in the streets, call for a community meeting. Let the chief be there, ask for names of people who want to be part of a forum, to deal with this project. So I think it's important to start it correctly. You need to get engagement with all important roles. If you don't do it that way, you end up.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. Any? Yes, sir.
In this particular instance, you've named that the construction company is the responsible organization for community life, whereas the project managers of the organization who are putting the project on the should have done this engagement way before the construction company got involved. And it should have been written into the tender document. And all that engagement should have been done a lot earlier than when the construction company was
Yep. Agree? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I think for me the issue is that the engagements generally up front seem to create harmony quite often. But it's the problem that starts when certain decisions are taken in these community forums and the community expects follow through. And quite often, for example, the projects that we work on, we'll work with the local government to actually manage, to help us with the community, because they have to do a lot of the actions. And when those actions are not forthcoming, is when the community starts to get quite agitated. So I think it's more the follow-through action that you've already decided and how you implement those actions, because you need to see results. Because I think it's more service delivery issues rather than the fact that it's anything to do with the project that we have a problem. So I think from that point of view, it is quite often, I think, where as much as you can, so it's very difficult. I mean, how do you as a company or as a contractor actually manage the local councillor to be able to do an action that is actually promised? And I think that's probably where part of the difficulties that we are finding come through, is that it's not in our control. We have no control over circumstances or anything. So we rely on the local government, the chief, or the ward councillor to deliver on certain things. And if he's not delivering, I think that's what agitates the community more than anything. So I think those are, so it's, I don't know, it's almost like you have to keep managing delivery. So not only as a project manager, you manage delivery of your project, you've got to manage delivery of your stakeholders
Yep.
as well to be able to see your project. Otherwise, things just don't proceed.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you for those responses. I mean, there are a couple of issues. One is that when you deal with chiefs, we should also not have the automatic assumption that all the stakeholders in the area recognize the legitimacy of the chief. So it's important that as part of your homework, you also establish from your own point whether the king or the chief enjoys legitimacy. And it could be that the chief enjoys legitimacy as a chief of the area, but when it comes to community projects where there are employment and business opportunity issues that may arise, then in that area, the chief's legitimacy then disappears, or the communities do not have that much confidence. So it's important that you establish for yourself, has there been a history where the local community have objected to the chief's decisions one way or the other? You need to establish that for yourself. I have been in situations where the opposite has been the case, where the chief was told, look, you are a chief looking at community development issues, employment issues, stay out. It's none of your business. The other issue is that when, from the conceptual phase and planning of the project, it needs to be clear that who is going to do the engagement. And we need to then to establish the capacity of that person to engage. So establishing engagement capacity becomes important. And I think you mentioned an important point that sometimes you have to engage with the ward councillor. But you should not rest on your laurels and say it's the councillor who is responsible for engagement. You need to establish the engagement capacity of the councillor, because you may have to extend yourself and capacitate the councillor. And also, you need to establish for yourself what is, in fact, the history of this councillor with the community. It could happen that during the elections, the local government elections, one faction or a group of people came together and said, we are going to push the name of this councillor, and the councillor gets elected, and a project before your project came in, the councillor was compromised one way or the other, or some people had a negative perception, maybe wrongly, about the councillor, and then the councillor has now lost legitimacy by a section of the ward. And maybe that section of the ward are the people who are really influential. And the councillor that you are relying on actually does not have engagement capacity or engagement legitimacy. You need to establish these things for yourself. And also, as part of agreeing, who's going to do the updates to the community leader? Is it the project manager, or is there a designated person, maybe it's a community liaison officer, whoever has been appointed, who will then do the updates? How often are these updates being done, and what are these updates? And there needs to be formal meetings where the update to the community is signed off. It's important to have proper document management, so that tomorrow, when there's an accusation that your community liaison officer did not share certain information, there will be a record of the content of what was shared, and there will be a record of meeting, and there will be an attendance register. I have seen public participation processes where perhaps environmental EIAs have to be done, and there were no attendance registers, and everything falls flat. So basics must be done. We must cover every base. Also, what is important is that there needs to be agreement as to, once we have established the legitimacy of Motsamai, there needs to be agreement with Motsamai's organization that will the updates be one-on-one, that is Motsamai on behalf of his organization, or will it be with the executive team of which Motsamai is part of that organization? Generally, try not to have these kinds of updates. Do updates in a formal setting with elected community leaders. Motsamai may be the leader, but he's got a team that he works with, and then you have your attendance register. If you can, avoid the one-to-ones, because when things turn ugly, it's your word against theirs. I think I'll stop here, and we'll go to the next session. I'm not sure if we need a 5-minute body break, or are we good to go? Good to go. Yes, sir.
Was he supposed to be from the community or more independent? Is he
That's a very important question. Generally speaking, my view would be the CLO must be from the community, because the CLO will understand the community, understand the dynamics of the community. How you appoint that CLO also becomes important. Because oftentimes if you just do your own appointment and your only comfort is that this person comes from the community, it may actually be problematic, because somebody else is saying, it could have been me. Your process was not fair and transparent. So you need to engage with the community as to how you're going to arrive at that process. Is it going to be an open process where you're going to advertise and people apply, and you then do the interviews? And sometimes if you have that open process, the community may say, we want one of our own to be in the interview panel. Sometimes the company will say, no, employment matters are company policy issues. We do not bring outsiders into the process. So sometimes it's a give and take. At other times, the community may be so fractious that the community doesn't have confidence in any one of them. And you may, per agreement, bring somebody from outside. It can happen. I'm actually, in one of the communities I'm dealing with, I'm actually dealing with that particular reality where I'm doing all the community facilitations, and I'm also engaging with the community to set up a community liaison arrangement. And the view of the community here is that they are not going to get a community liaison. We're going to set up, call it a community liaison company, where we're going to take a few people from different sections of the community for fair representation, establish them into a company, and then we're going to train them to be able to do community consultations. Then it's a local company that does community consultations. So other service providers who are coming in, there is a company that's locally based, and it's part of, developing local suppliers. So you can be creative about it. So,
We once done the project at the school in the rural area, so we had to upgrade and refurbish. We had the headmaster, we had a whole committee form. So it was the chief, it was the headmaster, it was the police, it was the priest, it was people from the ladies forum, so it was about 7 of them. And they attended once a month, and we had no problem.
yep. Look, if there was a perfect science to this, I would have given you that magic wand by now. The reality is, and you know yourself, that there isn't such. You have you have to engage, have an intelligent system, and you have to stay on the ball, because things change all the time. Thank you. I think,
One last contribution. I find it a bit confusing at times. The more you seek to understand how to deal with the community, the more you end up in a confused state. Because I say, you have made valid points as to, you say, community engagement is a responsibility of all. You cannot, as a project team, the guys come doing a project of community. You cannot remove yourself entirely. But neither, I see it as a risk if you get too involved with the community to a point where they almost overlook their structures and they speak to you directly. And it becomes difficult when the CLO is now beginning to make direct phone calls. That phone call that he makes to you on a Friday or Saturday. And I think sometimes it's actually best to just ignore that call, because you may be fostering what may be seen as a clandestine kind of friendship. Now, come in the PSC with the project that this trouble project that I dealt with, and I'm still dealing with another phase of it right now. We have the PSC, which has its own structures, and part of the PSC is a CLO and a chat from the business forum, and they have someone from the end user, and the client also sits from a spectator point in those PSC meetings. I almost feel like if the PSC, if you can get the PSC to have a structure and get people who have legitimate standing where the project is being done, it's best to almost, at that point, let them run their show. At least you're never speaking to one person. They will always appear at the debriefs as a group of people. What they go and report back to the community becomes their problem. That's how I was. To me, it looked like a structure that worked very well. So the PSC is a mother, and the PSC also selects the CLO. So we don't, as a project team, we don't get involved how they find that man and his legitimacy out there. Because I mean, again, you dig around and you find that somebody has got no legitimacy anymore, but the PSC has pushed him forward. What then do you do? Because if you get involved and you get a taboo, and then taboo becomes a problem to this, then you will be accused of having interfered with the PSC, so you have an agenda. And that's not a position you want to find yourself in.
sure. The, oh, sorry.
There's a PSC works well, and in certain cases, in most cases, you will be establish a labor desk within the PSC. And when you have that, they decide as to who is employed on the project. You are able to explain to them, even project as a contractor, you project to them what your labor needs will be, looking at the peak, how many people you employ. And they will help you to sort yourself out in terms of the skill issues that we talked about, and the training, you put everything up front. And then they have their own terms of reference that they deal with. And with that, sometimes when you sit on the PSC, they have monthly meetings, said that you report. So there's a lot of transparency there. Questions are asked, you answer, and all that. Therefore, you don't have issues with the community. That's the best way. That's what
I agree. Look, one is not going to prescribe what kind of structure you should have, but the emphasis really is that your processes must be transparent and your engagement with the community must be effective. The way you structure it, it's really a question of horses for courses. I have seen PSCs that work very well, absolutely. And I've seen PSCs that started off well and over time lost legitimacy and something else had to be put in place. So, and as I said, if it works, it's okay. But the fundamental point is that you need to engage effectively. Make sure that process is covered. And also when you do as part of your risk management process, you need to be able to say, down the line, when the PSC loses legitimacy, what are our options? You need to be forward-looking because communities are unpredictable. These issues are unpredictable. Structures change over time, interests change, outside influences creep in. So as part of your process, you need to look forward. You need to have plans that says, if this fails, then here is my plan B or my plan C. You need to almost look forward to these things and have definite plans. Don't be caught off guard. I mean, if you're caught off guard 90% of the time, I'm worried personally. I mean, if you've got 70% readiness, in terms of anticipating some of these issues, you're good to go. I saw a hand at the back. Yes, sir. Yeah, you raise very important points there. Maybe let me start with the last one, that local communities or sections of them do not really want to work, and then you have to ship in people from outside the community. It is a challenge, unfortunately. And it's a question of rising expectations. I worked on a project where we had one of the guys quite notorious in the community, initiating community protests. And, he submitted his CV, he went through the interview processes, and he got a job, and they then took him through the induction process and spoke about the rates. And I'm not sure whether at the beginning, were the rates explained, but during the induction process, he then said, no, I'm not going to work for peanuts. And the induction started on a Monday, and he left. Around about lunchtime, he left. And that induction, was disrupted. The induction itself was disrupted the next day. So you do sit with some people who are just, and there's a difference between a genuine stakeholder and allow me to use the word, a hooligan. There are some people in the community who are just set to cause trouble. And it's because they are looking for what they are looking for in a particular package and in a particular time frame. And if they do not get their way, they will disrupt. And you need to find a way of dealing with those. Sometimes you have to isolate those and deal with them as in a robust manner. But it's a challenge. Some communities, you have to share people from outside. And I think when you engage, and I made a point earlier on that sometimes it's a question of rates. People do not want to, there's a comparison factor. They do not want to work for certain rates. And how some people work is, they are not looking at, if I get X income, I'll be able to buy ABC. They are saying, they are moving from they move backwards to front, that I want to have ABC, and therefore I want income that can help me to buy ABC. That's how they work, and therefore that becomes a problem. So generally, I indicated in one of the points that if you've got a host of unemployed youth, and there's a youth culture of competition that is prevalent in the area, you're going to sit with that reality. Because it's going to be, I want to buy this, or this standard of living, or this kind of competition. And this project must be able to deliver those issues. And you have to deal with those. With respect to the 30%, and as I said in the beginning, transparency becomes important. So upfront, it's better when you know that this 30% is going to be raised, and it's a reality. That you as a project team, you sort out your plan in terms of the 30%. When you start your engagement process, your plan is solid. I often wonder when I see companies engaging with communities, and once the community, you just need one member. As soon as introductions are done and the welcome, one member, before you even go into the agenda, what about the 30%? And the whole meeting is derailed. Why do you walk into it when you know that time and again, it's going to be raised? It's better when you raise it and your plan is solid. Then you talk around something. Otherwise, the community is going to dictate your agenda. Remember that as a service provider, you've got targets. You've got a project to implement. You need to be ahead of the game if you can. You need to be anticipatory in your approach. I got to move to the next one. So let me just take the last two hands, and then we need to move. You had a follow-up, and then I'll come to you, sir. Follow-up.
Yeah, quick one. The 30%. See, the other problem is, it is not very clear as to what does it mean. Because what is 30%? But at the end of the day, it's 30% of something. And that goes to the point to say, at some stage,
It's a difficult one, and I guess I've also come across clients a lot of the time saying, "Hey, look, once you say this is the 30%, then of course, you're breaking confidentiality agreements not to say what the value of the project is. So it's a balancing act." And in the beginning, the organization needs to determine what, because community engagement needs to be predicated on transparency. You then need to say, in this quest for transparency, what will remain confidential? And that which is confidential, what are the risks of keeping it confidential? And then you need to put mitigation plans together to deal with that aspect. So you cannot say you're going to keep it confidential and leave it there. You need to put a plan in place to deal with the consequences of maintaining that confidentiality. And the reality also is that sometimes when communities know that this is the project value, the expectations go through the ceiling. Because when they see the value, they do not see what's the cost structure of the project. They only see R and M and a B somewhere there at the end, and they think that this is big money. We're going to cream it. So you need to determine how far does your transparency go, and then assess the risk, and then put a mitigation plan in place to deal with those risks. I know I'm giving you broad outlines rather than maybe a straight to the point answer, but look, that's really the reality that we deal with. I'll take the last hand at the back.
Morning, delegates. My name is Dumi Moahi. Ntate Modise, I feel that we honestly not clarifying roles. A lot of social facilitators that I meet up with don't have a clue what it is that they need to do. So I think there has to be a serious role clarification in terms of their scope of works, and I believe that their scope of works is not clearly defined, which now becomes the crux of the problem. Because you have a social facilitator who lives in Limpopo but is doing facilitation in Mafikeng, or vice versa. So I think that becomes a big problem. But I think we've been talking about a lot of problems since we've started, and I've not even heard one solution. So I think maybe around the tender clarification, one colleague mentioned that the social facilitator needs to be included as early as possible. I think maybe using a platform of a tender clarification brief, to clarify precisely to the community members to say, what, the 30% means X, Y, Z, and your participation is X, Y, Z. And one thing that you mentioned, Tate Modise, you spoke about hooligans in the community or wherever. Delegates, let's not kid ourselves. I think construction is filled with a lot of hooligans. Whether it's engineers, whether it's architects, whether it's contractors. Everyone wants to eat. I've seen principal contractors ripping off subcontractors. I've seen contractors ripping off subbies. So for us to actually manage this whole community aspect, all of us here, need to be on the same page. But no, engineers want to be rich by themselves. Contractors want to be rich by themselves. They want to play bricklayers 5 rand a brick or 2 rand a brick. So I think all of us here need to decide if we really want this to work or not. I mean, then having this discussion is really pointless. So I really feel that everyone should be engaged here, and social facilitation is a serious issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, those are very pertinent issues that you're raising. And in the beginning, I did mention that, at the conception and planning phases of the project, the issue around social engagement, social risk management needs to take center stage. And yes, you're absolutely right. There needs to be clarity of roles. And I've seen some cases where the scope of what a social facilitator should do, pretty much clear. And I've seen areas where it is pretty much something that needs to be beefed up. But yeah, role clarification is very important. And that's why I said in the beginning that community risk is part of project risk. So if you're a project manager, you then need to make sure that your social facilitator, whether that facilitation happens at the PSC level or within your immediate project, it is within your interest as a project manager to make sure that that function, wherever it lies, if it lies in your team, you make sure that every member in your team has got a clear roles and responsibilities. It's absolutely critical.
Maybe as a parting shot, what is the percentage of projects that have social facilitators and projects that don't have? Maybe just as an estimate in terms of percentage.
Let me first take the gentleman there.
Sorry, just to add, I think government is now implementing so-called watchmen, watchdog, whatever you want to call it. Right? I'm from Durban. The Department of Transport has been a leader in this field in KZN. A whole team has been appointed. These are consultants who are looking at all tender documents prior to them being advertised, who will look at the entire project to completion. So all these guys who think that they're going to be making money easily, the days are numbered. Right? So as of the 1st of November, every government department has to appoint an independent consulting team who's going to assist the Auditor General to make sure that they get clean audits and that you get value for money. So guys, the days of making money through devious ways coming to an end.
Maybe just a brief audit on the matter raised above. If you just raise your hand where, if you've worked in a project where you had a social facilitator, maybe just give us an indication where there was a social facilitator. All right, thank you. If you've worked in a project where there was no social facilitator, so a couple. Okay. All right, so we have to step off this now, otherwise we're running out of time. Maybe towards the end we'll have some more time to engage on some of these things. What we're going to look at now is to look at the legitimacy of the local community as a stakeholder. Whether it's a community in an urban setting or it's a community in a peri-urban area or in a rural area. And, you know, oftentimes people ask the question, why? I'm just a service provider. I'm here to do a job. I've just won this tender and mine is just to implement this project. So these social issues have got nothing to do with me. And why is the community bothered? The reality is the community is a stakeholder. That's the simple and straightforward answer. And you're gonna have to deal with it, which at whatever level it's dealt with within the project execution continuum, the reality is it's got to be there. So we're just going to look at a little bit more into the socio-political environment. We're going to look at the social contract and the community as a stakeholder. Right, now the socio-political environment is changing constantly, and when you have a social facilitator, you need somebody who is on the ball, somebody who understands what's happening in the environment, somebody who's your intelligence system as if you like. Now, some of the things we need to keep in mind, and I've mentioned the issue, some of the three issues around the National Development Plan, and one of the things I just want to look at is what we call the democratic dividend. A lot of the discontentment and protests that we have, over and above the issues of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, it's because of this perception that there has not been any democratic dividend. There's a view that since 1994, you know, our lot has not changed in certain communities because of various factors, including lack of service delivery. And about 2 months ago, there was a lot of debate in the media, and it was largely driven by the millennial generation who said 1994, that transitional arrangement was a sellout. So the people who were sitting around the table, they sold out because there are no tangible benefits. And if there were tangible benefits, by now we would have had radical economic transformation. So those sentiments drive perceptions that we have not received what we ought to have received by now, such that when companies come into this space, in the mind of communities, they are working from a backlog. When you come in, you are not just a Father Christmas or Mother Christmas. You are actually starting on a backlog, because this should have been done long time ago by the authorities. So that's something to keep in mind. People have a quest for dignity and a better life. And that's why sometimes when people do not want to work for certain rates, it's because they say it's not going to help me in my situation or to move faster out of my situation. And sometimes it's not purely because people do not want to work. And so we should not, lump people with or paint people with the same brush. Sometimes it's simply because people do not think those rates are good enough. And we can have a debate around that. So issues around radical economic transformation and the recent debates around land and free education, they are part of this pot within which people say this democratic dividend has not come to fruition. Around the 17th century, Rousseau wrote a book called The Social Contract. And in it, he was addressing the political system at the time, saying that, those who come from royalty do not have an automatic right to rule society. The real power lies with society, with those who are ruled. And they give the authority to the ruler to rule. And that has, in a sense, impacted how industrial societies have ordered themselves in terms of running a particular political system. And that's why today we talk about democracy and we've got elections, wherein ordinary people like yourself and I, we go and elect certain officials, and they will then become members of parliament and so on, and they then rule on our behalf, at least so the theory goes. And then what this then says is that society, through government, gives business the right to operate. And society, through government, sets the rules of the game. And because it sets the rules of the game, it gives business the license to operate. And that license to operate comes with certain obligations, and those obligations must then flow back to government. For example, if you are doing business, you need to pay company tax. That's just one example. If you are doing business, there's a BEE charter, and there's the 30% that must flow back to the local community. That's part of the social license obligations to operate. So it's important that when we look at communities, we understand it also in the context of there is a social contract, and that social contract says the business has certain obligations that of necessity goes beyond just paying company tax. Now, as long ago as 1971, from the Business Week, there was this piece that came out, and it says, today it is clear that the terms of the contract between society and business are in fact changing in substantial and important ways. Business is being asked to assume broader responsibilities. And today, I'm sure we can all attest to that there are certain, the demands on business are increasing by the day. And to serve a wider range of human values. And even when we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, there is a particular chapter there where business has to come to the party. And it says that its future will depend on the quality of management's response to the changing expectations of the public. And for me, I think this quality of management's response, there lies the crux of the matter. Because we do not have linear solutions. We do not have simplistic formulas to deal with these community challenges that we have. But what will determine whether we succeed or whether we fail is the quality of management's response. And that quality of response is informed by a number of things, and I want to mention two. Number one is that we need managers who can manage in an unpredictable environment. Things are no longer as predictable as they used to be. We need managers who can manage contradictions. You raised, my brother, on one hand we are saying people are looking for employment. On the other hand we are saying they are not prepared to work for that particular rate, they want something else. That's contradiction. We need to manage in such an environment. So the community is definitely a stakeholder because they have a share, or they are impacted by whatever project that we are looking at. And that type of stake could be just an interest that they have. Maybe they have a right, and that right is entrenched in law, that there must be a public participation process, and or sometimes it could be ownership, which oftentimes would be an issue of the shareholders. So stakeholders, communities in this case, are people who are affected by the company's objectives, the actions of the company, the decisions you make, your policies and your practices. So if this obtains in a company, then your nearby community is definitely your stakeholder. You cannot wish them away. You have to engage with them in whatever form or manner. So when we look at the project or the business, obviously there are, your client there, or your shareholders, the people, your contractors or your employees, and there are other service providers who are, helping you, and then there's the community, and you are sitting right there in the middle, and you need to manage all of these as a business or as a project, because stakeholder management is important. Now, when you do your stakeholder management identification and mapping exercise, it's important to have your primary stakeholders and your secondary stakeholders. Oftentimes, I find that companies that work in proximity or, whose project impact the community, they tend to have community as a secondary stakeholder, but it's actually a primary stakeholder. And this is part of your mapping exercise. I'll not spend time on this one. So another question that gets raised is, but why should we take communities seriously? Well, you ought to, for the following reasons. And it can apply to any stakeholder. Have we established the legitimacy of the community as a stakeholder? Yes, because of the social contract that we spoke about earlier on. Yes, because they are impacted by the project. And is there a need for us to engage with the community? Yes, of course, because they've got the power to disrupt our project if the PSC does not work properly, or if there's one form or the other of dissatisfaction or discontentment. They've got the power to disrupt, to delay, or to block. Is it a matter that we need to take very seriously? Yes, of course, because oftentimes we cannot delay community engagement. Oftentimes we have to respond reactively to some of these. And it's because there's an urgency factor. If we delay engaging with the community, it can have an impact on our project timelines and even on our costs. So, the community as a stakeholder, it's important that part of this engagement is to secure buy-in for the community. Now, it's important that when we speak about this buy-in, that we do not have the view that we've got the community as the strong person on the one hand and the company or the project as the weaker party on one hand. It's an in a sense, in the social contract, it's an equal partnership. Also, it does not mean that because community engagement is so important that you are going to say yes to every little demand that gets made. It is impractical. There come times where you have to say no, and your no must be a no. There comes a time where you put your foot down and you say it's not going to happen, because after all, you are running a business. And a business has to be run on sound business principles. So, it's important that we do not walk away with the idea that because a community is a stakeholder, therefore everything goes. That's not how the real life works. So considerations of communities can impact your implementation of the implementation of the project, the cost, timelines, safety issues, and also how you comply to your own contractual obligations, and in fact, the very objective of that project. And so it is incumbent upon us, when we implement these projects, to seek opportunities for collaboration. And in this context, that collaboration is to make sure that we've got buy-in. And that buy-in is that certain things can be done and certain things cannot be done. There are yeses and there are nos. And I've found that oftentimes when communities are really engaged, when you say no, they do understand it's a no. They may not be happy, but they understand. Right, on time on this one. Now, when we look at this one, it says, during the project planning meeting intended to look at the resource requirements, there is a long debate on whether or not to make budget provision for the position of a community liaison officer. The project sponsor turns to the accountant and asks if it's necessary to budget for a CLO given the tight budget. Jacques, the PM, is sitting next to the accountant and says, and the question is, what should Jacques do? Should he make budget or not? I'm primarily interested to also get some views, maybe not directly related to this, but perhaps somewhat, from those who raised their hands and had not had a community liaison officer or a social facilitator on their project. Maybe they can share as to how did they deal with the social or the community issues. Were those primarily just dealt by the PSC? How did they structure those? Any thoughts? Maybe let's start with those whose hands were up. How did you, if you do not have a social facilitator, how did you deal with the, community issues, with your social issues? Anyone who can offer to share with us? Thoughts? Yes, sir.
Thank you. As far as our project are concerned, the CLO should be catered for in the tender document. You see, when you tender, you have to include the CLO, whether it's 4,000, 5,000 for the period of the contract. That's how we do it, because you can't do away with the CLO. And somehow there must be a budget from somewhere, so it is better to have that included in the tender document.
While you are there, could you share with us what process do you follow to get to the appointment of a CLO? And maybe whether you've had some of your good experiences and bad experiences with CLOs.
Okay. What will happen is once the project is presented to the community, which is through a public meeting, the first thing you will do is to inform the the ward councillor and brief him on the project, give him the details of the project. When is it starting? When is it ending? The actual specification of the project. Now, once you have done that, then you will set up a date to introduce the project team, the contractor, the client to the community. Then, on that day, that's when you will indicate that this is the date when the project will start, and this is what we will require, from the client's perspective. PSC, and then from the PSC, then the CLO will be appointed. So how the CLO is appointed, it's contractor, it's expected to get CVs, it's not head-hunted, it must be competitive. So CVs will be supplied from the entire ward, and then interviews will be done. Municipality will be there, on the interview to have their input, the contractor, the client. And then once the appointment has been done, then the CLO will be presented to the community to say, based on the CVs that have received and the interviews, these are the results. And if the community is fair, which they will in most of the cases, they will accept the CLO. But there are always cases where the community does not favor the CLO, so there will always be fights to say, no, we don't want him, we want the other one. But that is the process, that we use currently to get the CLO on board.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's a hand behind you.
Thank you. I think what he explained, it's one of the ways of getting a CLO on board. But there's also a common way whereby you find that the ward councillor has got all those powers to actually give you either candidates possible for employment. And you cannot then go outside that. As a contractor, you will actually now be allowed to sift through these candidates and then recommend one to the ward councillor. That is another way of interviewing them if the community feels we all need this equal opportunity to get this position. But if it is not a norm there, you cannot actually even call for that.
While you are there, have you ever had a situation where you got these CVs from the ward councillor and you appoint, and later on there's a allegation that the ward councillor only forwarded, the CVs of his group or his favorites, that there was some favoritism involved?
We have had such. We actually addressed it by saying, let us then open this position up for the community to be called in for an interview. Initially, we were following what was happening before, that the ward councillor will usually bring the candidates in. How he has such candidates. In some communities, you may find that a person has been involved in many projects, one person, as a CLO. But the people were seemingly, to you, fine with it. To a point where now they raise a concern, and then you can see, and then you sit down with the community. So what should be the way forward? Then it's open up for everybody who can qualify for the position. Then you must do interviews.
Okay. Thanks. Maybe just a comment. I've seen the hands. I've been in a situation where a CLO was appointed, and then some community members raised the issue that the CLO is actually from the neighboring community. He's not originally from that community. And that sparked quite a situation, and we had to redo that whole process. So oftentimes issues of then upfront processes will then say that, you know, when we do the interview process, then those candidates, when they come, they need then to come with an affidavit from the police to confirm that this letter or this address that they have is actually exactly where they reside. So some community members have demanded that the fact that you just have this address is not enough. We need an affidavit as a and we had to do that as a standard process. But it depends, I guess, from situation to situation, but it can get to that point. I think there was a hand. My brother, you've got the mic there? Okay, and then my brother will come to you.
Thank you very much, sir. Delegates, mine is a quick comment. I think we really need to look at the CLO issue very carefully, because I've once been engaged in a project where the CLO himself was actually instrumental in, you know, agitating disruptions to the project. So you find that a CLO was appointed on the basis that, you know, he can interact with various, you know, sectors of the society, and he can help the project move forward, but only to find that when the project is now in progress, he's then pushing his own agenda in terms of mobilizing the so-called business fora to actually disrupt the project. So I don't know, I think let's deliberate on this matter and sort of, you know, devise an amicable solution, because really the CLO is a critical personnel on the project. But also they abuse us and push their own agendas and then disrupts the project.
Thank you. The gentleman here. I think they bring it to you.
Thank you. I'm involved in a project where you have 8 wards being affected by the project. So you can see, if you're dealing with one project and you have one ward councillor and you have complications, what will you do when you have 8 ward councillors being affected by the project? The answer is the stakeholder is supreme in this case. So we have to bring all 8 ward councillors together to form a PSC, where we have a PSC of about 40 people. You know. So it's not something that you take lightly. You need to be as transparent as possible. To select a CLO for 8 wards is a mammoth task. Fortunately, we agreed to select 2 CLOs because the projects have been divided into 2. And it has to follow a process where everybody understands. The ward councillor, the ward that is, the project is in, actually, the project is situated in one ward, but it's affecting other 7 wards. And we have to agree to say that ward gets the preference of at least bringing forward the first CLO, and even in terms of employment, they get preference in a way. So just trying to add to the discussion, there are complex issues, complex project conditions or complex project situations that we face there. But it's all about you, as a project manager, acknowledging the stakeholders' role and making it a priority, making sure that you are involved in all the discussions, making sure that you have proper structures in place to report back to them and be transparent as possible. Be present in their meetings. Don't ignore the PSC meetings. It's key It has not been easy. We appointed contractors in February, we handed over site in March, but we couldn't actually start anything until May. That shows the difficulties there. But after we put everything in place, we were able to start work, and everything is going on smoothly. But just to say, we have complex issues when it comes to stakeholders, and we have to take it as important as it is, as we take our project work important. Thanks.
No, thank you. I'm actually also working with some other client where they've got a couple of projects. During the first project, the PSC worked fairly well, but towards the end, there were a number of issues within the PSC. But fortunately, the project there were some minor delays. The project was concluded, and now they're into the second phase of that project. And we've now spent the last 4 months just discussing how to reconfigure the PSC based on some of the issues that were raised in the previous meeting. And a lot of those issues have to do around community engagement and also perceptions of the roles of ward councillors. I think, let's take the hand here and then we'll go to you, sir.
I just want to maybe get an input from the colleagues around here regarding the project steering committee, because in most of our projects, the steering committee are not supposed to participate in a project, as in benefiting with subcontractors and staff. But the other challenge is they are not paid. So how in the project do they deal with such challenges? Because now we have a situation whereby the steering committee will say, if I'm not going to benefit in a project and I'm not paid, then I'm going to leave the project steering committee so that I participate in a project. Thank you.
Yeah, we got the question. Any thoughts that you are, the PSC, there are people who are participating that they are not getting paid, volunteering their time, or they are not paid from that project, and then they say, look, I'm not getting paid, I'm out of here. How have you met those kinds of situations, and how have you dealt with them? Are you going for it?
Yeah, morning, colleagues. Actually, that was my question, because I am involved in a project where. Yes, yeah, and that was my question in sort of responding to this, because we have a CLO, the project committee, and suddenly the project committee is putting a demand of a sitting allowance that is required from the project. And now the question is, the budget for the PSC probably is not in the project. The committee saying we are not going to sit unless we have the sitting hours. And I think that was my question. I think my colleague has come before me to say, I think that also need a discussion in terms of the budget allowance for the PSC was the will. And actually my project is showing the complex because the community has been working on a road project which they were getting a very healthy sitting allowance. And now the project that I'm involved in is not as extensive as the road, and they actually are putting on the table to say this is the actual allowance we want to sit on, and the project, I can say, in relation is not as big as the road project. So we're sitting with that kind of project.
All right. Any thoughts around that? Any experiences you want to share on how you've managed that situation? There's a hand at the back.
Thank you. With our projects, you know what we do at the beginning, you make it very clear that, you know, being a member of the PSC, it's not a job. You are actually serving the community voluntarily. So the least that is done is to cater, you know, on the day. To say, okay, there's food, drinks, and sometimes the contractor it's gentle enough to maybe give them money for transport if they are coming from far. Because most of the time the project will be within the community. They just walk to the site camp. So I think the main thing is to be clear to say that this is not a job. But you see, what will happen is, because those people don't have jobs, they will come, and then as time goes on, you know, as they get to know the project and the budget and all, then things start to change, you know. Some of them will create companies just for the sake of benefiting. And once they know the details for the project, then they will want to get out and be subcontractors. And you can't control that. There's nothing you can do. But you make it very clear to say, if you come as a PSC member, you are a PSC member. If you come as a subcontractor, you must resign and become a subcontractor. So that is the only way that is done in most of our projects that we're doing. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Thank you.
That's a hand. Or let's take the hand at the back and then we'll come to the front.
Thank you. I think what I'm not hearing here with regard to this project steering committee is also the COS, Council of Stakeholders. What maybe I may not be too sure is whether one replaces the other. But what I understand, as he was also explaining, is that the Council of Stakeholders is normally those leaders within a communities that are there to serve the community, as he is saying. So you normally will have no provision made towards the allowance. But the council the CLO will have a provision that is made. So I'm in agreement with the understanding right from this beginning that for this Council of Stakeholders, they are serving their community. There's no allowance that the project is bringing to them. But one thing that I want just to also throw across is there are rates issues on the CLO that are a serious problem, where you find that you are doing a project within a community, another department is doing a project, but your rates are not agreeing, while you have agreed from your kick-off meetings. Suddenly they bring the issue that, but the CLO in that project is getting 8,000 and your provision is for 5. Then you go to the Department of Labor. They say you can pay as between 4 and 8. Now you are paying 5, but it seems like it's not enough. You have a project in Cape Town that is paying 5 and it's running. Thank you.
I think there was a hand in the front. Oh, no, the gentleman there. Sorry.
Thank you. I think I'm doing projects within a Kuruleni, but for things to be easier, I think the council, Kuruleni, we have the project steering committee code of conduct that has been approved. And therefore, all these conduct having imprint in it about the PSC being voluntary. So if you have settings already set up, so before we set up we do a workshop for the PSC, the community selects the people, we do a workshop for them and we go through the code of conduct. And therefore, right from the beginning, you know that you are not going to benefit. And it's stated clearly in the PSC code of conduct. So it assists in diffusing some of these things, because then it doesn't become a project specific to say this project I'm benefiting, the other project I'm not going to benefit and all that. So within a crew lane, we have the PSC code of conduct that is there that we use as a guide. And I think that can be relied on. When it comes to CLO's remuneration as well, there is the EPWP guide to say how much you pay general workers specifically for all the projects within the crew lane. So that still is being passed through. That's the document that we use. So it's assist so that we don't have people being paid 5,000 there, the other being paid 8,000 that side. So that's what we've done, which is assistance.
Okay. All right, any last hand before we close the session and take a body break? Maybe just a parting comment. The issue of PSCs, it's a very vexed issue. And it's very important that we deal with these things from the beginning. And keep in mind that the reason why, these slides, the focus really is on community risk management. And the emphasis is that what do we do in the beginning? Because oftentimes to deal with things as you are going on, which is also the reality of life, but it's always better to deal with these issues at the beginning of the project. The issues around training your PSC on their roles and responsibilities. I have seen situations where in the haste of getting projects off the ground, PSCs have been set up and people are just not clear what their roles are. And you even have issues of governance. And the gentleman there at the back mentioned people who then, they're sitting there, but then they also want to benefit from the project. So then you've got issues of self-interest and how do you then manage that kind of conflict of interest. And these are the things that, as part of your risk assessment, upfront, you then pick up on these things and you manage them upfront before they happen. And that's really the emphasis, for these 3 sessions is that let's manage issues upfront, because it's oftentimes difficult to manage these things as the project goes along. Yes, surprises do come up, but more often than not, when you've done your groundwork up front, you've done your training, expectations have been managed, and even your PSC members, they've got written roles and expectations, and they have signed off, it's in your file, that a PSC member understands their role and expectations, they have signed off. When they start raising certain things, it's easy to sit down and say, look, remember in the beginning when we have this induction session, and this is what you committed to, this is how it works. You can't, and it becomes easier to manage the conflict of interest. Because it should happen that if the CLO is sick or the CLO for some reason, disappears for whatever cause, somebody else must be able to come on board, because you just press the button or you open a file and you know exactly what's happening, and everybody has been receiving reports. Everybody has been on board. And the reason why I said in the beginning that when community risk becomes the responsibility or just the monopoly of one person, it presents a project risk or an organizational risk. Yes, in terms of direct responsibility, there's one person who's responsible, but the whole team needs to know what's happening. Just as the person responsible for project finance needs to update the team what is happening. So if your CLO does not even know what's happening, even on the technical side, in what phase the project is, the CLO position, it's a position for somebody who steps up. It's not just grabbing anyone, any CV. It's a serious role. Right, so community engagement is really a process that the organization develops to speak to the community that may be affected by its decisions. And there is a cost of engagement. Many companies, groups, they they tend to take shortcuts because it is costly to engage. If you've got, pressing deadlines, you do not have 6 weeks of engaging forwards and backwards with the community, but sometimes it becomes important and it becomes necessary. And at times, even when you refuse, it may be imposed on you. And once it is imposed on you, you are actually saying to the community that for you to listen to them, they need to disrupt. So you need to be also careful. That's why proactive community engagement, you setting the tone of how you are going to engage or relate with the community. Don't lead the community to a situation where they need to disrupt. Because if they disrupt and you go to the table to engage, they're going to do it next time. You have just told them that this is how you work. You listen through disruption. And people have been asking, why do communities burn down their structures? Why do communities, when they protest, they burn down the library? Well, the experience is when they talk, nobody listens. But when they burn, somebody runs. It's not necessarily the right thing. It's not, absolutely not. But that's just how things work. Sad and bad as it is. So as a company, as a project, you want to be proactive and set the tone and culture of how you're going to engage with the community. So a few principles in terms of community engagement. As we've said before, you need to search and identify those who will be affected, and involve the community. Now, one of the mistakes that some companies do is that when they talk about community engagement, they see it as a one-way process. We are going to inform. We're not talking about community information. We're talking about community engagement. When you engage, one of the principles is that you are going to influence and you must be open to be influenced. If you engage with communities and you are not ready to be influenced and to bend at some points where you can bend, it's not worth the effort. We need to engage in good faith. Transparency is important, and provide people with facts. And a point was raised earlier on about, what information do you divulge? And as an organization, as a team, you then need to decide on what points are you going to be transparent and how you're going to manage the risk of not being transparent on those points. It needs to be in the plan that as we have decided we will not divulge the project value. The risk is communities may not be happy, and therefore they may say we are not transparent, and what we are giving them as a company is less than what we are saying, and therefore we are prone to disruptions. You need to plan for it if that's going to be your decision. Nothing must be left to chance. And the CLO needs to be on the ball with these things. The CLO needs to know that as this project, we are not divulging project value, and it becomes his or her responsibility to deal with that matter. Critical importance, keep your promises. Do not make promises that you cannot keep. Sometimes companies make promises in order to diffuse the situation, but it will come back to bite you. Let your no be a no. If the project will be stopped for a few days, but that no is necessary, stand on your no and keep engaging. I'll come back to you, my brother. Please just hold it there. And then the engagement process is, as a team, what are the objectives of this project? And then you identify and analyze your stakeholders. You develop your engagement plan. And the question is, does your social facilitator or your CLO, does he or she have an engagement plan? because the CLO must be measured. If you're not measuring your CLO, you're not doing it properly. The CLO must be measured on the plan. Everything must get measured. And there needs to be agreement, when do you review? And then obviously you need to monitor and to measure. Right, so if you can just look at that. So when you set the objectives of the organization and set the objectives of the project. And the two must be in line. And then when you identify and analyze your stakeholders, is who are the stakeholders? And understand their interests. The interest of the local forum for disabled people may be that they want you to maybe employ one of the disabled persons to be a clerk or to do clerical work. So when you identify your groups of stakeholders, understand their interests. And the CLO or social facilitator must have these things on his or her fingertips. Because this determines everything. If you do not know what people want, you are in trouble. And as a matter of fact, these interests are not static, they change. Today they want something, tomorrow while you are addressing it, they are not interested, they are busy, they have moved on to something else. So this is also a moving target. That's why agility is important for the CLO. The CLO must constantly look at the operating environment because it's changing. And once you've done your stakeholder analysis, and part of that, you're going to do a stakeholder map. And part of this map, you're going to say, all right, there's the power there and there's influence there. And here in one of these quadrants, you're going to place your stakeholders, because you need to understand, as I said on the previous slide, their interests. After doing their interest, you need to understand their power to disrupt or to influence. And once you've done the rating, then you can decide that if your stakeholder has got a lot of power and a lot of influence, you know they belong, or with little influence, they belong to keep satisfied. You know, just check them out here and there. And if it's low power, low influence, you just monitor them. But it's in your plan. It's not accidental. But if it's high power, high influence, you manage them closely. This is where now your engagement happens. So after having done your stakeholder identification, you're not necessarily going to engage with each and everyone. You're going to prioritize, and those with high power, high influence, they're going to fall into your quadrant. And depending on the system that you use, and the values you arrive at in terms of here, you will find that your different stakeholders, when you plot them, maybe for example, you will find that your unemployment youth forum, they are maybe in that corner there, and maybe your disabled forum, maybe they are somewhere in that corner there. So within this quadrant, you can have stakeholders at different points, depending on their rating, once you've done your analysis process. And then of course others you will just keep informed. But when you have this then is your strategy for engagement. And it's in your plan. Then when you do your engagement plan, it's going to say, this stakeholder I keep satisfied. How? By emailing information. Or this stakeholder I manage closely by doing what? I meet with them every month face to face, because I have to manage them closely. And I have a presentation that I'm going to present. I'm going to give them some sheets of information that I want to share so that they can have something to refer to. So it will inform your engagement plan. All right. So your engagement plan then will have your stakeholder. So it's going to be a table that you will develop, the objectives, what are your key messages. A CLO does not just go there to go and engage. The CLO must have key messages and they must be written down. And they must be signed off. Everybody in the team must know what is the CLO going to say. And when the CLO comes back, the CLO must do a report, a written report, to capture the reaction or the feedback. And the method of engagement, is it email or is it face-to-face? The interest of the stakeholder and the interest of the company. Because if, from your engagement plan, you will clearly see that if your interests are different from your stakeholder interest, you're already sitting with a potential conflict. And your plan must also say, what is your desired outcome? Because you need to measure. I'm going there, when I come out of that meeting, I want the community to support the project. When you come back as a CLO, they did not support the project, you are reporting that we have not met our desired outcome. It's part of measurement. We are managing. Of course, then, you need to assess the plan and you need to monitor and measure. I think that's fairly straightforward. So when we look at community and negotiations, it's important to identify the leaders because it is difficult to negotiate with a crowd. When you have 200 people or 300 people at the site office, you're not going to talk to all of them. It's impossible. You need to talk to them and say, we are prepared to engage, but please select 6 amongst yourself, and then we will go into the office and engage. Sometimes it happens that amongst themselves, there's a level of distrust, and they will say, no, nobody goes in. We all go in. You already, partly that will tell you that there are issues even amongst themselves. It's not a homogeneous group. There are different interests within that group. But you cannot negotiate with a crowd. You need to identify with the leaders. Identify the leaders and engage with them. But it's also important that sometimes the crowd will elect the leaders. You engage with the leaders don't give feedback to the group. Tomorrow they come back and they close off, they say we did not receive feedback. So that's why as the CLO, you need to make sure that if in the meeting you say, go and give feedback today, you as a CLO, you need to make sure that that meeting, you are aware if the meeting takes place. If you said before sunset they would have met, and that meeting didn't take place, you already informed the project team that that meeting did not take place. There's a risk that 4 a.m. they will shut down the plant. And for some of my clients, we've set up WhatsApp groups so that we can feedback on these things quickly and overnight, that there's a risk of ABC happening. All right, have a clear agenda. Everything must be structured. Even as a CLO, you just don't go in and speak about everything. You need to control the form of engagement. And also, as I mentioned earlier on, determine the negotiations capacity of these leaders. Because sometimes it may be that you deal with people when you have an agenda, they don't follow an agenda. And you need to explain to them the importance of an agenda. Or while you are dealing to resolve with one thing, then they raise other things as well. And they move off what you are dealing with. So determine negotiations capacity. And even when I advise some of my clients, for example, maybe there's a policy, legislation, or white paper that government is dealing with, it may have potential regulatory impacts on my clients. We also look at the capacity of a portfolio committee to deal with a particular piece of legislation. So you then have to do international research and see how this thing was dealt with by other countries, and then you are able to influence parliament. And the same thing will obtain even at the community level. All right. Avoid the trap of confusing the interests of leaders with the interests of the community. Sometimes they may not be the same. Sometimes the interest of the member on the PSC may not be the same as the community. And you are sitting with, therefore, somebody who does not have legitimacy in the PSC. And these interests, by the way, as I said, they are changing. So the CLO, have your finger on the pulse. Watch what PSC members are saying. Listen carefully. Right. Some of the attributes of a community practitioner: understand local community dynamics. It's very important. Ability to communicate clearly. Of everything, this is the most important. You need to have advanced listening skills. When you're sitting with people and people in a meeting, you need to listen. And part of that listening is also, as we say in communication, looking at non-verbal actions. So your verbal and non-verbal communication becomes important. Because oftentimes, it's not what people say in a meeting, it's what they don't say that really matters. Because sometimes you leave a meeting and there is agreement on paper. But from observation, you know that there's no agreement here. You need to be aware of that. And patience is the name of the game, because at other times you can discuss the same thing for 2 hours. And you reach an agreement and another group member raises the same thing and undoes the agreement that you have just reached. And you need to have the capacity to manage disorder and the willingness to debrief. Oftentimes, community CLOs can be subjected to abuse by communities. You know, the shouting, the screaming, we should not take it lightly. Depending on the personality type of your CLO, this person may build up trauma over time. So if you're a project manager, you're working in a violent community where your CLO is always on his or her toes, make time for debriefing, maybe for counseling, because they can get impacted. I have seen this. And of course, you need to deliver. CLO, do not make promises. Because the project manager said, come back with a yes. And you will come back with a yes at all costs. Don't do it. It will bite you later. Right, as we're about to conclude, it's important that we look at the culture in terms of how we manage risk in the organization or even the project, at the project level. Because the risk culture will inform the attitude and the approach towards community risk. If your attitude is, it's not my job, it's not my concern is to implement this project within budget and time frames, it will also make you to not have much of an interest on community issues or to be lax about it. So your risk culture is informed by your company values. If your company value is deadlines first, you may compromise the safety of your employees and the safety of your machinery. But if your culture is, transparent engagement and human rights, you will make sure that even the people that you employ, even when the community doesn't want to come on, you will make sure that they are properly documented. Because you respect human rights and you have respect for the law. Leaders must be involved. And involved here does not mean they have direct responsibility, because there is somebody who will have that responsibility. But know what is happening and have a healthy view about the community as a stakeholder. Do not reach a point where you say, because the community interrupts so much, I'm done. You're never done. They are a stakeholder. It's just as simple as that. You have to keep going. As indicated in the beginning, community risk is business risk. Community risk is project risk. It must be built. When you're busy with your conceptualization and planning, community risk must be built in. It's critical. And of course, collaboration yields sustainable results. There are things that the CLO may have a blind spot for. And that's why when you have project team meetings and the CLO reports, it's important for the CLO to report to the team. Somebody in the team, it may be somebody dealing with environmental issues or with compliance issues, may be able to raise issues that are a blind spot to the CLO. The CLO may not see certain things. And that's why even within the project team, that collaboration becomes important. You are able to sharpen certain areas of the CLO. Right, I think we're done. Right, so the project manager, we're almost done. The project manager receives a call from the local police that a group of protesters have stopped the project and demand to speak to him. And the project manager shouts at the station commander, "Do your job. Why don't you arrest those hooligans?" These things happen. If you have any comments on this, and of course on other things we have spoken about on these slides, we can have that discussion. We need to close shortly. We over time. My chief?
Tate Modise, just a quick one. Is there, under your elements of community risk, is there any reason why you left out non-payment or delayed payments from clients? Because, again, this is depressing me. We all sit here. I'm seeing a lot of my clients here who I know for 4 months have not paid us. You know, so I think we need to call a spade a spade. You know, if we want proper harmony within our projects, we need to understand that, you know, payments are important. You know, so maybe we should open up to the floor to clients, and clients must tell us that, you know, if they really want us to go through with this, they're gonna pay. Because I don't know if all of you remember the late Wandile Bozwana, who was an interesting construction mogul in the Northwest. He deployed methods that are very unorthodox. He literally had to beat up a lot of his clients, you know, just to retract payment. So what I'm saying is, I think it should be loaded as a serious community risk here. Thank you.
No, it's a very important point. There's no particular reason I've left out. Safe to say that it's not an exhaustive list of the number of issues and risks. It's not an exhaustive list, but yes, it's one of them. I'm actually dealing with something like that for one of my other clients as we speak. It's an issue. These guys have not been paid for 4 months, and they have now mobilized the community against the company. So these are realities. There's a hand there. Yes, sir?
Yes, thank you. My question is just, do you have any tips to make sure that the leaders are the leaders? You've mentioned it a few times in your slides, but the practice is, what are those tips? How do you make sure that they are the real leaders?
Okay. It's one of those questions that sound simple and straightforward, but it's actually a difficult question, by the way, for the reason that I've mentioned over and over, that legitimacy is fickle. Legitimacy is not static. And a leader that is legitimate today may be illegitimate tomorrow. And that's why in the first discussion point that I had about Mutsamai, it was to particularly bring up that point that the project manager is talking with Mutsamai for the last 3 months, and the community arrives and says, "Why are you talking to this guy?" It could very well be that Mutsamai was the nominated leader, but now he is not. And these things do happen. And it's because interests keep shifting. Sometimes what happens is the leader, instead of representing the community, is trying to procure benefits for himself. And then the community says, you are there for yourself and not for us, and he becomes illegitimate. Sometimes it is companies themselves that create the illegitimacy. When they deal with certain people, and sometimes these people are perceived to be the ringleaders, and they give opportunities to the ringleaders, and the community says, no, no, this is not how we work, and the ringleaders are removed, and overnight they are illegitimate. So it's a moving target in many respects. And the only way, well, one of the ways to deal with it is the CLO needs to be on the ground. You need to know what's happening. It's shifting, it's shifting sand all the time. It's not, legitimacy is not static. It keeps moving. There was a hand this side?
I have a mic.
Oh, you've got the mic.
Okay, all right. I may have probably arrived a bit late. Sorry for that. And probably the question I'm going to ask has already been discussed. But it's more to do with this business forum people. And I come from KZN, and that's where you've got this Dela Ngokubona, which is been described in the media as a mafia type of. I think they are so aggressive. They've stopped work. Some of them produced firearms and things like that. So the CLO position is really becoming very dangerous in that sense, not only for the CLO, but even for the project manager. On one side, they actually came and they, demanded to see the bill of quantities. They started identifying line items saying, yeah, these ones, it's our work, this is what we're going to be doing ourselves, cherry picking from the bill of quantity to say we're going to do these bits and pieces. And in some cases, they are trying to interpret that 30% thing which was announced by the then President Jacob Zuma. And now it becomes even tricky because like in this other case, it was a private, it's not a government project, this is a private hotel, So I'm just putting it out there to say, maybe there is need to identify more ways of letting communities understand, especially if these are some things which have been pronounced by politicians and which are now being put into policy and then disseminated downwards, because it's not easy for, at that level, to explain to a group of very angry people. Some of them were armed, who just come in, and in some cases they took people, locked them in a container on site until the police had to come and disperse people with tear gases and so forth. So I'm just saying as a point of discussion, maybe in the context of that discussion point, this community liaison business it may be becoming more and more deadly because the stakes are, have been risen so high. Yeah.
We cannot overemphasize the point. You're absolutely correct. And part of when you do your risk assessment, you are going to pick up issues that are external to the company or to the project, namely statements that political leaders make, expectations that they raise, lack of service delivery. Those are going to become your risks that you need to pick up, because what you are saying is correct, that you cannot explain, you may not be able to explain certain realities to a group of angry people. But if during your risk assessment process you have picked up the potential of some of these statements having the ability to inflame communities, it's on the radar screen that these statements, are here. So this can happen. I agree. I think there was a hand at the back.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking at the question in front there for discussion, and I'm just seeing the question really identifying with the project that we recently are busy with. Where in a particular meeting we were held hostage. The chairperson, who happened to be our executive, was assaulted. We were not sure whether we will come out of that meeting space safe with our cars. At the end of the day, we had to open a case. Now, opening a case, we were advised that in future when you have meetings, make arrangements we will afford you from our offices, people that can accompany you and be there while you are busy with your meetings. Even at our offices, such kind of an arrangement was made that you can always report and have the head of security getting you people to go with to a meeting. But looking at the whole scenario now, you feel like really should the running of the project come to this level whereby you cannot be there without this protection. What happens when you appear to be there without this protection? If they get to know you, at the end of the project, do you still take other projects to the same community? So that is a challenge that I have. Maybe that's why Jacques is saying, do your work.
I've just distributed the evaluation questionnaires. If you could kindly just fill it out. And then also please make sure that you have filled in the attendance register so that we can then sort out the certificate. And then there's a request from the ladies at the door that if you did not sign in there, if you could just see them after the session. But the point that you're raising there at the back is it's there. This coming Wednesday, I'm facilitating a meeting for one of my clients with the communities, and because of the risk assessment that the company has done, they've decided that that meeting will not be in a community hall. It will be on the company premises. Security will be there. They've also invited Sacpcmp, the police, to be there. Some instances, some of my clients have had to go into communities, hold community meetings with the police present, and that has happened. There have been cases where one group in the community, because of threats, another group in the community has requested that community meetings must not take place without the police because of the threats from the other group. These things do happen, absolutely. But that's not ideal, but that's the reality. The ideal is to gravitate towards not being in that hostile environment. But the reality sometimes is there is nothing that you can do. You have to, for a while, rely on the police to deal with a security situation. Because it's also important that if you're a company that says the safety of your personnel is important, at some point you need to distinguish between a potentially a threat to life and normal community engagement. Sometimes they are not the same. So at some point you need to say, now community engagement has ended, we are now dealing with a security issue, and security takes over. And until things normalize, then you are able to engage again. That reality happens. All right. Is there another hand? We need to close shortly. Please go for it.
All right, yes. Yeah, a quick one. I would have liked to, hear the issue of employment, especially the general workforce. Because you see, more often than not, when the project starts, there will be more people that want work than what the project can offer. So what will happen is when the project starts, there will be 100 people that submit their names, only to find that the project can only appoint 50, for example, or less. Now, there comes the issue of rotation, you know, and it becomes a problem because you will want to keep continuity on the project so that the people that are working get familiar with the work, and then, you know, it's easy for them to continue. But now the people who would have missed out at the beginning of the project come in and say, I mean, we also want to benefit. You are the community. Why are you keeping these ones for longer? You know, so I just want to check, you know, if there is a way of dealing with that, because it is a reality, and you know, the people that will not have been appointed, chances are they will come and stop the project and say they also want. Thank you.
Let me maybe give an example of one of the projects I was involved in, where we were dealing with community leaders and, you know, providing feedback, and we thought we had buy-in. And at a certain point, you know, there were disagreements between the company and the community leaders, and they resorted to protest action. You know, the police got involved, the MEC, it went even to ministerial level as well. And then when we did some groundwork, we realized that actually the leaders were not reporting to the community. 1. 2, we also realized that there were some goodwill projects that the company was doing in the community, and community members thought it was another company because the company was not really going out there and saying, look, this is the good work we are doing in the community. And so what we then did, we then decided to bypass the community leaders and call a community meeting, the whole community, to say, this is the situation. And in that instance, it actually worked, because the community then, in a sense, sorted out their leaders. And it worked for us. We even went to the extent of then setting up a community newsletter, you know, to give project updates. How far is the project? You know, how's the community benefiting? And, you know, employment opportunities and that sort of thing. And we bypassed your normal information channels into the community. And that, in that instance, worked out for us. So one needs to be very creative. So it's always important to say, what's the problem, and is there a way of getting around this particular problem? And when we do workshops as teams, we're able to come up with very creative ideas. That's why this kind of risk should never be left to one individual. Yes, one individual can be responsible, but if it's a team approach, we're able to come up with very innovative ideas to look at other ways of going around some of these challenges. And at some point, there may be challenges that you can't go around, and at some point you stop the project. It happens. I've been involved in those, where it's a cul-de-sac. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've come to the end. Sorry we kept you here longer than planned, but I want to say thank you very much. Thank you for your contributions, for the discussions. If I've met your expectations, well and good. If I haven't, it was not my intention, but hopefully you picked up 1 or 2 points that may be of benefit. Once again, thank you very much.